So thank you for coming. This is actually my first proper talk at a Perl conference. So um, I'm I'm not sure about how this is going to work out, but here I go. My name is José Joaquín Atria, and this talk is about this project that I've been working on and off for a little while. The slides for this talk are on the top, and this project hasn't been released yet, but if you want to look at the code for some reason, it's on the second link. So first of all, I really like Christmas. I really, really, really like Christmas. And a main reason for why I really like it is because of the presents, of course. But why? What do I like about the presents? Well, I like that they're a way to think about about the other people, and they're not just an object, but an idea about somebody else, about what they could want and what can make them happy. And of course, evidently, I also really like Secret Santas. And why do I like Secret Santas? Well, because my family is really big, which means that there's a lot of others to think about. And the Secret Santa allows us to have fewer presents that can be more targeted, and they're also a lot of fun because there's the secret bit. So there's a lot of different kinds of Secret Santas, and people do different ways of sorting and matching. And there's people who buy a lot of presents and put them in a pile, and then people get them out of there. But the kind that I'm going to be talking about very briefly is Secret Santas among people that know each other, among loved ones, where each person gets assigned a single other person, and then they give them a present and tell them who they were. So the secret stops when the present gets given. Originally, in my family, the Secret Santa was done manually. So basically, it would be my mom and my sister would put names in a bowl and then get them out, and then people were notified by whatever mean was available, which was not a perfect solution. First of all, it wasn't secret because my sister was involved and she was one of the participants. It was error prone. In 2007, I think, my brother got no one assigned, and my brother's wife got two people. So the email that we got as a family in response to that was from my mom, and it said, "Sorry, but shit happens," which was unsatisfying. And there was also a very high potential for mischief with people using dark arts to change the results of the sort, which was unacceptable. So in 2010, I decided to take over. I offered it to my family, and they were they were suspiciously welcoming of the idea. So now, do we get to see some code? Well, kind of. So this talk is not so much a history review of the code itself, but it's a history of a programmer, in this case, me. So each version that we're going to briefly look at is the result of me doing the best that I could at that time, which, as we'll see, was not very good at the beginning. Here we go. So the first version was done in time for Christmas that year, but it was sadly lost in time like tears in rain. So I don't really have anything to show. But the first known version is actually all in a single file, all in a single while loop. It's really messy. I thought that I would go over and try to explain what I was trying to do, but I couldn't understand it. Mainly because the variable names were really terrible, but also because when I tried to run it, it didn't actually work. So I don't really know what was the point of the whole thing. I then found an undated later version, which I think is from 2011, and you can see that it started adding some options, which is good. The results were now printed to files that I could just send to people on an email, so that I didn't know what the result was. And there were some functions separating the text, which is also good, but a lot of them were actually reinventing the wheel. There was one that was basically like 20 lines of code that was just a call to grep. done by me. I don't think I knew about grep at that time. And a lot of the functions that were in that file were never called, actually. So I don't think it was very good. Then in 2000, for 2012, I think, there was one that used pod usage, which was surprising. And the results were automatically sent by email, but there is an inexplicable use CGI at the top, which is not used, actually. I don't know what I was thinking when I put it in. For the year after that, there was some documentation, but actually the documentation seems to be copied from an entirely unrelated script. And there's some more feedback, and I started using references, which was, it surprised me a little bit. And UCGI is still there. And then in 2013, around October, I started using Git for this. So that's why I have more information about whatever happened after this point. For the Christmas 2014, I decided to add some configuration files. I switched from CSV to JSON, finally. I started using some email templates and started using OO. But at that point, I don't think I knew about any frameworks. So everything was done by hand. And there was just a single person class. In 2015, there were no changes. I was working on my dissertation, so I didn't really have time for anything. And then came August last year, and YAPC EU happened in Cluj, or I guess I should call it now the Perl conference in Cluj. Not sure. And that going to that conference really floored me because I realized that at that time I had been using Perl for about 15 years on and off, but I had always been doing it on my own. I had never shown code to people. I had never talked about programming to people. So I realized that 15 years later, I was writing 15-year-old Perl. During those 15 years, I hadn't really learned much. I was writing just really, really old code. So after I came back from the conference, I decided, well, I'm going to start looking over my old code and seeing what was there. And I realized that most of it was rubbish, and that the Secret Santa, as we've seen, was really not an exception. So I used that as motivation to try and tackle one particularly tricky problem that I had. There's millions of implementations of Secret Santas online. And one of the things that all of them support is exceptions. So, I am a participant, but I get a randomly assigned person who cannot be me. And maybe I don't want to get my partner or the person that I got last year. So you need to be able to implement those exceptions. But I wanted to have conditional exceptions, basically exceptions that only happen when something else had happened. Basically, in my case, I could not get this person if somebody else had got another person or if some other condition was met. So this is a bit tricky to think about, so I'm going to give the specific use case. At this time, I was not doing Secret Santa just with my family, but also with some friends. And so that's me and my partner. We were living in Japan at the time. And we were doing Secret Santa with two friends, two couples. Two of them lived in Chile and two of them lived in France. And what we wanted was to be able to exchange presents between us, just freely and randomly like that. But what we did not want was two people from the same group to give two presents to people from the same group. So in this case, no two insects giving presents to two felines. And the reason why we wanted to do this was because we wanted to make it a little bit more fun so that the people in France would get presents from Japan and Chile, not just from one place. And of course, in order to implement this, the easiest way that I could think of was, well, no insect can give to a mammal if an insect has already given to a mammal. But of course, that's a conditional exception, and that was tricky to. No one implemented that, so there were a lot of really ugly hacks to try and do that. Meanwhile, back on topic, for the Christmas that year, I did a complete rewrite. I learned about Moose, which was good. I implemented a sorter class, and that sorter class now fired events. And those events allowed me to implement these conditions. So the code of calling the Secret Santa now looks a bit like that. So you have the Secret Santa class, and then you can load information from a JSON file, and then you register all the conditions that you want. In this case, there's an assign event, which basically whenever a person gets assigned a new target, this event fires, and you can check whatever you want. And you can call that function retry, which basically tells the sorter, hey, we need a retry. And then you just sort it. And the data that is being loaded looks like that. So it's basically just an array of hashes, and the hashes represent participants. And basically that just gets pushed as is to the constructor of whatever participant class you'll be using. Because of course, they could not necessarily be people. We could be talking about, I don't know, insects or felines. And this is actually more or less what the code to avoid group intersections looks like. It's very relatively simple. So each participant has a number of groups. So you go through each of the groups and you look for each of the members of the groups that you belong to, and you see if they have a target. So if they had already been assigned to someone, and you check whether there's any intersection between the people that they're giving to and the people that you're giving to. And if there is an intersection, you request a sorter to retry. And this just works, so it's fine. And with this, basically, you could implement whatever sort of conditional exception you could possibly want in a Secret Santa. So there's that. In 2017, so for this year, the changes that I had thought about doing, basically, at this point, this project had become just a testing ground for whatever thing I had learned in Perl. So at some version, I also started using log any to log everything. At this point, I realized that I could use moo to do a lot of the things that I was using with moose. So I switched to that to see how it went. I started thinking about releasing this to CPAN, and I'm really scared of top-level namespaces. So I just chucked in an Acme in there, but I'm not really sure if that's the proper one. So I'm accepting suggestions for names. And then I started using Mason for the email templates, but I just wanted to learn some Mason. So it's possible to implement others. And I started using roles for the sorter and the dispatcher. And now the hierarchy started looking a lot more complicated. But this was really sort of, there wasn't a lot of thought being put into this at this time. I was just playing with roles. And then came July this year, and this talk was accepted. And that was more or less my mind state, because I really didn't know what I was going to talk about. And I saw this tweet by Leon saying that he was doing some conference-driven programming. So I decided to do the same. And if you look at the history for this project, it has 159 commits, but 134 were done actually after the talk was accepted. So since then, we now have an entirely new hierarchy. There's a Secret Santa main object that has a list of participants that are put into groups, and they're implementing the group as a separate object that is connected to both the participant and the Secret Santa allows me to manipulate the groups that the participants belong to, either from the Secret Santa or the participant, which makes the interface a little cleaner. There's now a dispatcher, a sorter, and a renderer role. And basically what that does is the sorter does whatever sort of sorting you want, and all that you need to do is implement a sort mechanism. The renderer puts those into something that is suitable to be dispatched in some way, and the dispatcher sends it to somewhere. And just to have some fun, I implemented a renderer that just puts it into a string, and I implemented a dispatcher that sends it to a handle, which could be a file handle or just standard output or whatever, and an email dispatcher that just sends it on an email. But of course, I'm eagerly waiting for people to implement whatever sort of dispatchers and renderers and sorters there are. So basically, the gray boxes there are roles, and then anything that does that role can be plugged into the Secret Santa at runtime and change it. So you could have a same Secret Santa object being sorted and then dispatching those to emails and handles and whatever it is. So that's the current state of the project, more or less. All these objects are linked with weak references, which I recently learned about, so that's good. There's type validation using type tiny, and I decided to try and bring the test coverage as high as I could. So I'm using test class moose, and I managed to get the coverage to about 95%, which uncovered all sorts of highly educational bugs, and it was a lot of fun. So there's a to-do list for next Christmas, which is, I guess, coming up. I realized that you could try and implement the participants as a weighted graph, so that you could say, for instance, make it more likely that I get people that I haven't got in recent years, but I haven't done that yet. And if you have a full picture of the participants and the likelihood that you would get them, you might also be able to validate when a particular setup is impossible, which is something that I've been toying with, but haven't really been able to sort of implement. And of course, I would like to have more sorters, more renders, more dispatchers, because why not? And I'm not really sure if I should release this to CPAN. Why not? But for that, I would really need a good name, and I don't know if I have one yet. Thank you. That's it. I don't know if there are any questions for this.
Why do you like Christmas?
Well, funny you should ask.
I just saw your talk.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a lot of fun. And give me an excuse to do all this.
That's great. And yet, release it to CPAN.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see what people do with it. But I'm not sure, but like the interface is, I mean, it's sufficient, but...
Well, you won't have many users.
No, I guess not. I guess I won't.
I know a company that does Secret Santa every year that could use this.
Well,
You can get a job from it.
huh? Maybe I'll get a job at that company. Maybe I'll convince someone to let me write something for the Perl Advent calendar.
The next role will be to sell the presents from Amazon, and you get rich.
All right. Maybe there's a dispatcher that is actually sending things by post.
Exactly. And automation. I don't want to buy it. That's my card.
Another thing that is not implemented is the possibility of adding, of assigning more than one person to another person.
No, I have a question. Can you have two secret Christmas objects pairing together? Like you participate in both, and you want to have process rules, for instance?
Well, not by design, but since basically you have these listeners, these event listeners, and those just call a function, as long as both Secret Santas were designed, are in scope, then you can check the conditions from either at the same time. So,
what happens when you have impossible conditions?
well, currently it just runs for a really long time trying to find a solution. So that's why I would like to implement something like this, where it if there's a way to say, well, actually, this doesn't have a solution.
How about when it gets into an impossible situation? Like it's possible to solve it, but it gets so far along. I assume it's kind of doing incrementally, right? So it gets so far along, and then it says, well, I can't solve it because of the work I've already done.
Right, but it's not that smart yet. Basically, the only sorter that is implemented just uses a Fisher-Yates shuffle, and it just keeps shuffling until it finds a solution. And the only reason why it would stop is because something like this, where you would have where you would have one of the callbacks telling the sorter to retry. So currently there is no check, there is no track of how many solutions have been attempted.
So when you do retry, you start all over.
When you call retry, there's an internal boolean that gets set to true. And then, because I wanted to, when you do retry, the sorting doesn't retry immediately. you're basically notifying the sorter that that a retry has been requested. So you could have another condition that sets the retry boolean to false, sort of messing with this value. But basically, when the sorter finishes after firing the assign event, it checks whether retry has been set to true by anyone, and if it has, then it just throws everything away and starts again.
So no backtracking.
No nothing, no nothing yet. But pull requests welcome.
Because the sorter is just a plugin, so I could write a genetic algorithm sorter.
You very well could.
Retry would just be a cost.
Yeah. Yeah. So that would be maybe one solution to this problem. The validation gets more tricky once you have these arbitrary conditions that users can plug in, because you could have a condition, a malicious user that just retries always, and then of course that's impossible. But it will be tricky for the system to be aware of that. Thank you.